Hello and welcome. This is episode 6 of the Apple for the Teacher podcast. My name is Anna Thomas and I'm looking forward to presenting today's stories to you. Firstly, I'd like to say some hellos to a few people that I've met through my Apple for the Teacher Instagram page. Thank you so much to Kristen and Libby, who have listened to the podcast and have said some very nice things about it. If you have a look at the Instagram page, you'll see more info about the stories and photos of the people featured. Now, before we get into this episode, I'd like to do a little experiment with you. Imagine you haven't listened to this podcast or have any idea what it's about. I'm going to give you a summary of the episode so far. A bus hijack. The murder of a teenage boy. 6-year-olds confronted by a shooter. A lady murdered at her workplace. A man suing for bullying. A lady losing her life just before retirement. 6-year-old children kidnapped for ransom. A girl suing for the clothing she wore. And a storybook read to children about a gay rabbit. Would you believe that all these stories are true and happen to people in the school system? Well, they have, and the events that happen in schools is the focus of this podcast. I'm a teacher myself, and as I research these stories, I'm very fortunate to say that I have never experienced what these people have, and the stories have been eye-opening to say the least. My aim with this podcast is to find stories that haven't been featured on other true crime podcasts. As a true crime enthusiast myself, I sometimes do come across stories that I've heard on other podcasts. So before deciding to cover a story, I'll do a general search to see if it's already been covered. Hopefully, you will find stories that you've never heard of before. But of course, I don't know of every true crime case ever covered, so some might slip through. But as best as possible, I aim to tell untold stories. And because this podcast is specifically focused on schools, it's most likely the stories will be new to you. Each episode will feature a bad apple story and a good apple story, so that a fair and balanced representation of the school system is given. So let's start with a preview of the stories today. Story 1 is The Bad Apple and is called Rock, Paper, Scissors. Why was a teacher cutting a student's hair while singing the US national anthem? Story 2 is The Good Apple and is called Bad Hair Day. A teacher trims a student's hair for school photo day. Is there any harm in that? This first story is bizarre to say the least, and you'll soon see why. As a teacher myself, it's just beyond me why the teacher in this story did what she did. Last year, in December 2018, a high school teacher in California, USA, behaved in a manner that can only be described as very, very strange. Margaret Geisinger, a 52-year-old science and chemistry teacher, was arrested after a video posted online showed her cutting the hair of a student that she had seated in a chair at the front of her class. While cutting his hair, she sang the US national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, and tossed chunks of his hair behind her with the rest of the class looking on. I've watched the video, and here's what happened. The boy sits down, and the teacher does actually cut his hair. Realizing she was serious, he gets up off the chair, but she orders him to sit back down in the chair, saying that he was not done. After she cut more chunks from his hair, the student got up again, at which time the teacher said, "Next." She kept repeating, "Next, next, next," while waving the scissors in the air, and obviously wanting someone else to sit down in the hair. in the chair for a haircut. It's at this point the class realised she wasn't joking. No one volunteers to sit down. So she points to a particular student and walks out into the class, grabbing the girl's long hair as if wanting to cut it. The girl said no repeatedly and pushed the teacher away with her arm. The students then all fled from the classroom. Reports about the incident reached the school administration. The principal arrived and the teacher was still singing the national anthem. There were 2 students in the corner of the classroom and the teacher told them they could not leave. But the principal told the students they could leave and stood between them and the teacher as they left the classroom. She explained she was having problems with her cell phone and so decided to have a haircut day. She said the student had volunteered for the haircut. She also said that the students would not stand for the national anthem, so she decided to sing it herself and give haircuts at the same time. This explanation just sounds so strange to me. What does a phone not working have to do with giving haircuts? The whole thing just doesn't make sense. Anyway, she was told she could not cut a student's hair regardless of whether they volunteered. The principal then sent her home, telling her not to return to class. The police department was called to locate and arrest the teacher. During a search of her home, police officers found 2 pairs of scissors and several locks of hair in the front pocket of her purse. She was arrested and taken to jail, with bail set at $100,000, and is facing charges of child cruelty and battery. When questioned by police, she told them she brought scissors to her class to give a foreign exchange student a haircut. The boy was actually living with her and her family. In the report, she states he had been acting like a ding-dong. She was tired of the ridiculous behaviour and had to talk with him several times about his flippant attitude in class. She also said he had talked about wanting a haircut, but instead it was actually a different student who volunteered and came up in front of the class. When asked if she understood that her actions scared the students, she said, "I bet." She admitted that she didn't like teaching, and she guessed, in inverted commas, that she had planned the haircut prior to coming into the classroom that morning. The police also questioned the students, who said the teacher announced she was giving free haircuts and wanted a volunteer. The students decided to play along, and one boy volunteered to sit in a chair that the teacher had set up at the front of the classroom and turned to face the rest of the desks. The girl who almost had her hair cut said that the teacher had said all the students were getting haircuts today, and she wasn't sure what to think because she was kind of a weird teacher but really nice, and that she sometimes did weird things. One of the other students said she was terrified but agreed the incident was out of character for the teacher. She is a loving and kind lady. She is usually all smiles and laughs. This is not the Miss G that we know and love. Just days before the incident, the school received complaints from students and a parent about the teacher getting irate with the students and telling them to stop using their cell phones in class. When the principal spoke to her, he said she did appear a bit anxious that morning, but nothing that caused him any concern. In another incident, a girl said the teacher asked her if she'd ever heard a teacher use the bathroom. Students also recalled another time when the teacher had a meltdown in her chemistry class because an exam went missing. Looking at her previous history, her teaching credentials were suspended for 14 days in 2016 for immoral or unprofessional conduct, and also suspended for another 2 weeks in 2017. The teacher's husband said she appeared to have snapped. "It's beyond anything I could imagine," he said. "Something happened to her, stress-wise, and she just must have flipped out. It's a shock to me. That's out of her character. She doesn't do stuff like that. It's not her. It's not who she is. So I don't know what was going on with her. I don't have any clue as to why she did it." Her sister has said she's very ashamed and remorseful for her behaviour. Let's be clear, there's no tragedy. Yes, she had scissors, but she didn't hurt anybody. She has had outbursts of bizarre behaviour since she was a little girl. It wasn't so surprising, really. It was just shocking that this video had gone viral. She also has willingly checked herself into a hospital and is seeking a psychological evaluation. Her family now hopes she's getting the help that they say she needed for so long. Unfortunately, this video is out there and she does look like this crazy science teacher, but she really is a very good-hearted, loving person, her sister said. The Education Department provided a statement that she was dismissed and would not return to her classroom. The boy concerned has hired a lawyer, and although the teacher has been dismissed, the boy still doesn't feel safe at school. The lawyer says he couldn't believe what was happening. He frankly didn't know what to do, and he thought to himself, me or anybody else, she's coming for someone else. And then the video, of course, we see that later. But he was absolutely terrified. He hasn't been back to school since and hasn't decided if he will return. After spending a few days in jail, the teacher left covering her face while crying as she walked out of the detention facility with her husband. If convicted, she could spend 3.5 years in jail. She has pleaded not guilty and will return to court at a later date. So what do you think about that? Bizarre, right? The video of the incident can be found online, but I'm going to post it on the Apple for the Teacher Facebook page if you'd like to have a look. To me, it does start off as a joke and the students are all laughing. The boy who sits down, he's not forced to, he does it willingly, and the look on his face seems to suggest that he wasn't very concerned. But of course, after she does actually cut his hair, then the class realises the whole thing is getting out of hand. And of course, while she's doing all of this, she's singing the national anthem very loudly. This all occurred in December 2018. And as we know, the court system proceeds very slowly. So I'm going to continue to monitor this story and provide any updates in a future episode. Let's now have a break before story 2. Let's now go on to story 2, which is The Good Apple. This story continues on with the hair theme of the first story. It takes place at a private school in Melbourne, Australia. Rowan Brown was the deputy principal at the Trinity Grammar and had worked at the school for 30 years. He was the head of the senior school and the disciplinarian. An incident occurred last year in 2018 where he trimmed a student's hair on school photo day. He was sacked and the school sent a letter to parents stating, quote, "His actions were at odds with school policy and inconsistent with community expectations in this day and age. As a result, the school council was of the view that Mr. Brown's leadership position at the school was no longer tenable." Mr. Brown made a statement to the media saying, "I'm saddened by what happened. I would like to go back. It's a good school, and this is tearing me apart. I just can't comment further." The school community was shocked over the incident and came out strongly in support for Mr. Brown. He was very well respected and students threatened to boycott classes. Hundreds of students sang protest songs against his sacking. What came out afterwards was that the boy whose hair was cut did not want Mr. Brown dismissed, and that the boy's family had not made the complaint. This left many people believing that the sacking was political. In recent times, there had been tensions brewing and an undercurrent of frustration and anger amongst the school community. Many accused the school of becoming too preoccupied with high ATARs, fundraising, and building projects. They believed Mr. Brown stood in the way of the headmaster's vision for the school because he represented the old school values, caring for the community and moulding of young gentlemen. One teacher stated, "This was a school who produced well-rounded men who had an interest in the wider community, not just their pay packets and status. The school is being destroyed." The headmaster at the time, Mr. Davies, came to the school in 2014. And since then, it's reported that there had been an exodus of staff from the school since he took over the role. One estimate said that about 150 teaching and support staff had left in the past 4 years and were given generous payments to leave the school. Many people had expressed their concerns that the school was spending so much money to get rid of perfectly good teachers. There were also other controversies that the school was embroiled with. In 2016, a former employee of the school was committed to stand trial over historical sex offences against 5 boys. Then, in 2017, the school was again in the headlines over allegations that members of the school, including the headmaster, Michael Davies, knew of abuse allegations against a former teacher. They sent a letter praising the teacher's extraordinary legacy to the school after his death in 2016. The lawyers representing the victims described the letter as stupid and insensitive. The school received a great deal of criticism over this matter. Some believed Mr. Brown's dismissal was part of a much bigger power struggle, and that he was the last hurdle standing in the way of those who wanted to change the school's vision and direction. Many came to Mr. Brown's defence, saying, "The school was his life. He worked 100 plus hours each week. He's the heart and soul of Trinity Grammar. He embodies what the school is about, raising well-rounded young men as opposed to the best and brightest. It's all about community service." A former board member at the school said the student who had been given the haircut had been previously asked many times to trim his hair, and in his opinion, it certainly wasn't a sackable offence. A former student said, "When I was at school, he'd tell me to shave. I had a love-hate relationship with the guy, but I have nothing but respect for him." Another school member said, "Cutting a student's hair that's too long might be out of line with current standards, but it just seems a bit extreme what's happened. He's old school, but I don't think he's too strict. He's very popular with the kids and the parents, and I think there's a lot of people who will be devastated by this news." In a show of support for Mr. Brown, a truck mounted with LED screens circled the school at pickup time, showing messages calling for the headmaster and the council to resign. Following the uproar, the school set up a meeting because it understood the impact the recent decision had on some quarters of our school community. More than 800 people attended the meeting and more than 1,600 had signed, an online petition calling on the school to bring Brownie back. The aunt of the student whose hair was cut spoke at the meeting, where she restated the fact that the family and the student involved were not upset by Mr. Brown's actions. The student said he never wanted Mr. Brown sacked and that he was a great teacher and mentor. One of the students stood up and said, quote, "Until Mr. Brown is back, no one will tell us what to do or what to wear. Until he is back to tell us to do so, nobody else can and nobody else will. Today, we fought for him like he has fought for us. Our motto means act manfully. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, our boys acted manfully, and we should all be proud of them." A parent addressed the crowd saying, quote, "This is not a factional war. It's a fight, absolutely. But it's a fight to save our school for our boys and the many who will follow, so they too can have every opportunity not just to do well academically, but to be socially aware and positive contributors to the broader community." Other speakers stated that the school leadership decision to sack Mr. Brown showed how disconnected they were from the school community, and as a result, they came to the conclusion that they could no longer be trusted. There were 6 resolutions put forward at the meeting. The first 4 were passed unanimously, including motions of no confidence in the school council. The headmaster, Michael Davies, had a motion of no confidence against him passed, although it was not unanimous. And the final motion stated that Mr. Davies be put into a caretaker role and have his decision-making powers restricted. This was also passed. And finally, at the close of the meeting, the community demanded the reinstatement of Mr. Brown, or further legal counsel would be sought. A week after the sacking, Headmaster Michael Davies announced the school would hold an independent review into the dismissal carried out by a former judge. The review found his dismissal was not justified, and he was offered his job back at the prestigious private school. Mr. Davies said the school was thrilled to have Mr. Brown back, stating, "You'd understand, it was a trying time at the end of last term, but we're really keen to put that behind us and move forward. Personally, I look forward to working with Mr. Brown and the rest of our colleagues to make sure that our focus remains with the well-being and education of our boys." Mr. Brown struggled to hold back tears and said he was sorry for the upset caused. "We make mistakes, and I've made one, but it's a terrific school, and there's a bit of me here, and there's a bit of me, of the school in me. I accept the apology from the school, but I also owe the school an apology as well." He was asked if he would be hanging up his scissors, and he replied, "The obvious answer is yes." When he returned to school, there were smiles, tears, and hugs at the gates. Students shook his hand and embraced him as they filed into the schoolyard, almost 6 weeks after he was sacked. With the media present on the day of his return, Mr. Brown checked the boys' uniforms and told one boy to tuck in his shirt. He also joked, "No long hair in the photo." The incident had caused a crisis at the school, with 3 school council members, including the chair, standing down. After a month after Mr. Brown returned, the headmaster, Michael Davies, announced his resignation. A new headmaster was appointed and a new school council was elected, with the aim to foster reconciliation within the school community and restore the school back to a state of harmony. This case shows that the call for school accountability is strong and loud. With deep budgets, families expect good teachers, sensible rules, and a pleasant experience for their children. Parents have substantial power, and the campaign to have Mr. Brown back was public, clever, and very well orchestrated. It involved numerous media interviews, protests from students and parents, and also threats of legal action against the school. Mr. Brown had shown over and over that he had the best interests of his students at heart, and everyone knew that. So when the tide turned against him, they were prepared to fight on his behalf. So, all's well that ends well. Here are my thoughts on this story. Although there was a good outcome, and it was proven that there was no intentional malice on behalf of the teacher, I still believe he should not have cut the student's hair. It's just not something that you should ever contemplate. I think it was lucky for him that he was a popular teacher and people rallied around him. Otherwise, the outcome could have been a whole lot different. Yes, as he was a more senior teacher, he may have got away with this earlier in his career, but in this day and age, you need to be super careful with everything that you do. It's just a sign of the times. If this had happened to another student whose parents weren't quite so forgiving, they may have taken the matter further, maybe even to court. So that brings us to the end of this episode. I'd like to now give you a preview of the next episode, episode 7. It's called Love Triangle and Bully Boss. Here's a summary. A brutal crime is committed, but who done it? Helen was granted a 6-figure statement, but what for? I would love for you to join me on the Facebook page and also on Instagram, where you'll find more information, photos and videos of all these stories and people that I've been talking about. So to end this episode, I'm going to leave you with this quote. What a teacher is more important than what he teaches. Bye for now, and remember to be a good apple.